Now, though, I'd like to introduce today's speaker and fantastic presenter and good friend, Jenny Downs. Jenny is a senior research fellow at the Telethon Kids Institute in Perth, Australia. She's been a researcher since completing her PhD in 2003, focusing on issues in relation to child disability. Her research involves children affected with many rare childhood disorders, including Rett syndrome. Her work increases our understanding of natural history from early years through diagnosis, through childhood growth and development, and subsequently through transition to adult life. She's also investigating modifiable environmental factors, including treatments that can be used to improve quality of life for those with Rett syndrome. Another aspect of her research is the development of robust outcome measures. She's currently working on the development of a measure for quality of life in children with intellectual disability. Jenny also completed a watershed research project funded by RettSyndrome.org studying the impact that an enriched environment has on a child with Rett syndrome. Jenny is joining us today to share this body of work and answer your questions. So with this introduction, Jenny, I'd like to welcome you and say good morning to you in Australia, and we're so happy to have you with us. If you're ready, I'll go ahead and turn the screen over to you and you can begin.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Paige. Thank you for that.
Great. One moment, and I think we'll...
I'll show my screen.
Please.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So you all get to see my screen. Have you got my screen?
I can see it. Not quite in slide view yet.
Yeah, okay, I'll just minimize that. I'm nearly there. Okay, and you're there now?
There we go. We can see your slides and your webcam. Thank you.
Okay, that's good. And please, Paige, do indicate if the little webcam is distracting to the slides. So thank you so much, Paige. You're right. You are a good friend, and we have known each other for many, many years now, and it's a real privilege to have had the links and the connections with everybody at RettSyndrome.org. So the topic is about gross motor skills and how we might be able to improve them using environmental enrichment strategies, specifically for Rett syndrome. And you will notice from the very introduction slide, I had an AU at the end of my name, and that stands for Australia. And of course, here you can see some of the very distinctive features of Australia: our wildlife, our black swans, our beautiful beaches, and really the centre of Australia is just red desert, but it is has its own beauty in its own right. And down the bottom you can see the child disability team here at Telethon Kids Institute. Many of you will know Helen. I'm there, and the rest of us are there, all wonderful people who all make a contribution to our work that you see here presented. And this is just a quick picture of a group of families who came to an afternoon tea here at Telethon Kids Institute, and that was a great occasion. All lovely families and beautiful girls. So my first slide is just a summary of Rett syndrome, and I've titled it with the title that Bengt Hagberg used in his 1995 paper, where he gave the most beautiful, precise description of Rett syndrome, and he called it clinical peculiarities and biological mysteries. And of course, that was in recognition of the distinctness of Rett syndrome, which was being newly recognised, and the biological mysteries that we have since discovered since that paper, that Rett syndrome is associated with a mutation on the MECP2 gene. But over the years, we've always known that there has been regression followed by stabilisation of skills, and the four main criteria that you see listed there relate to movement. Hand stereotypies, of course, are involuntary, but the loss of hand skills, communication skills, and gait difficulties are related to more functional abilities. And of course, there are also the supportive criteria such as autonomic breathing, scoliosis, growth difficulties, sleep problems. But interestingly, in that list of supportive criteria is that very intense eye communication. And that really is the only feature there that really hints at this other parallel gestalt. So we have the gestalt of what we see clinically, but we also have the gestalt of the children demonstrating extraordinary capacity to thrive and learn and establish and maintain relationships. And that all goes in parallel with any clinical signs or symptoms that we might be seeing. And that really leads into today's topic, which is related to motor skills, which is one of the criteria of Rett syndrome, but more about how children learn. And so we have this parallel concept that goes alongside the list of signs and symptoms that you will be very familiar with. So in the first instance, I will start with just a summary of early motor skills. And thinking to that regression period, we had a clinical psychology master's student who collected interviews where she worked with families to map the developmental events that were occurring during their daughter's regression period. And what we also found that in 8 of 14, a little bit more than half, some of the children also lost some balance. And this occurred in children who were able to walk as well as in children who could sit. So balance was also an issue for a greater issue for girls during this regression period, and that is absolutely consistent with the development of ataxia and having more difficulties walking. We also observed from our developmental profiling that this loss of skills was actually quite subtle and occurred more slowly than, for example, the girl who might lose her hand skills slowly or indeed quickly, and usually happened a little bit later than the earlier onset of the hand and communication loss. And we did notice when we looked back at earlier literature that another paper had surveyed parents in the UK and found something similar, where parents reported that gross motor skills were affected during the regression period. So very much gross motor skills are really a part of this fundamental period of change, and that's important to recognise. So we know from our very large data collections from AussieRett, our Australian database, and also InterRett, many of you will be a part of the InterRett study, that we know that almost all girls with Rett syndrome will acquire the ability to sit on their own. And this is largely before 18 months to 2 years of age. We also know that learning to walk is harder, and this is also a very large data set of Australian and InterRett participating families, and we can see that a little bit more than half will learn how to walk independently by about 5 years. So that's a little bit smaller proportion compared with the skill of sitting. So here also, walking is a very good illustration of how mutation has an association with different presentations. And you can see this is learning to walk, that previous graph, split by the different common mutations, which you can see underneath the slide. And you can see that some mutations are milder and is more likely, the girl is more likely to be able to learn how to walk. And then other mutations that are usually associated with greater severity, that girl would be less likely to be able to walk. But we can also see that there are patterns, but there is also a very clear picture that one size does not fit all. And in each of the groups, there are children who can and cannot walk. So we have some variability within the mutation groups. But what it tells us, looking at these graphs, is that the learning to walk is something that occurs early in most cases. And this is also the time period when our brains are most receptive to learning new skills. That is the time when we have the greatest neuroplasticity. Our cells are more interested in connecting differently and laying down strong foundations that equate to the learning of skills. And that really is the time to act, to promote the acquisition of gross motor skills. And so what our goals with regard to environmental enrichment is to take this natural history trajectory, if you like, and move that up so that more girls who might have capacity to learn to perform skills like walking might be able to do so. So we're kind of looking at that graph thinking the early years are important in terms of learning skills as substantial as learning to walk. But of course, we are lifelong learners. We learn all through our life, through our experience. But here is a time when we might be able to have greater impact. So this is just a quick summary of skills in general, which does point to why we developed the intervention that we developed. So I'm just pointing out with this graph, this is our video study in Australia, and this is, you can see this fabulous number of families who have submitted videos to us over the years that have given us such rich insight into gross motor skills in Rett syndrome. And here you can see, and this is across ages, this goes up to from little children right up to women in their 30s. But you can see that 3 is without assistance, it's independent, and you can see that the greater that proportion dominates across those graphs for sitting skills, which I'm not surprised at, because that's what we saw in that earlier graph where the majority of girls did learn how to sit. With regard to standing, that is harder, and you can see that that column in the category 3 drops down a little bit lower to around about the same proportion who can walk. You can see that transfers are much more problematic. And for example, sit to stand, the graph in your top left, has the highest proportion of girls who are independent at that skill, but that is much, much less than the other skills. And in this graph, it's around about 18% of girls who can do that independently. And for walking, we over the age, including adult women in the picture, we have approximately 40, a little bit more than 40 actually, % who are able to walk on their own. So this sort of information gives us a lot of depth in understanding the sorts of gross motor skills that we would need to focus on. So what we have had over the last decade is a suite of studies, in fact, that have gone to laboratories who have looked at mice with a MECP2 mutation, and they have looked at those mice in different environments. One which is very bare, no particular features there that are of interest to those mice, and also environments that are much more busy and have things to do and participate in. And several studies have all been consistent in that the mice in the enriched environment setting have increased their motor coordination, and these are done with little techniques that laboratories use to look at staying, balancing on a spinning rod, for example. But also, at the same time, those mice have increased their production of BDNF. And BDNF is a little protein that's specifically is involved with nerve functioning. It's produced in the nerve cell body. It travels down that long axon of the nerve. It gets released into the intercellular space, and there it helps the neurons to connect. So it's a very important neurotrophin that helps with connecting neurons, and that can help with learning. So these were studies we have in mice. And I remember being at a presentation, and John Christodoulou, who worked by me, was there saying, this is our evidence for early intervention. And I looked at a slide similar to this and realised that what do we do? When do we do it? And is that really evidence that's going to translate across to girls, our girls? And so really that was a big spur to me to start writing grants, to start pitching proposals that this should be looked at more systematically in Rett syndrome. We have evidence with an animal model, and we don't necessarily know that learning is going to be replicated in us. Our level of evidence is so poor. So that was a really important moment sitting there in the audience at this conference. And what I will present is, you will see what we then did about that in order to address that question. So this is our question. What is the effect of environmental enrichment for young girls with Rett syndrome? And this, as Paige said, was funded by rettsyndrome.org. I was so proud to be funded by rettsyndrome.org because I connected with, can we increase the production, the acquisition of motor skills? I was so proud to be funded by rettsyndrome.org, and so were these people you can see in China, because these were our partners and collaborators for this grant, and we worked together to execute our proposal. So the chap with the pink tie is Tam, his wife is at the end, and they spearhead the Rett Syndrome Comprehensive Research Institute in Shenzhen in China. And you can see the neurology nurse and Dr. Chen in the white coat next to me, who's from the Shenzhen Children's Hospital, and she worked with us in putting together our proposal and also in putting it into action. So she was critical in getting blood samples for BDNF. And you can see this beautiful, beautiful, light, bright environment. In China, there's lots of people involved in anything you do. And so there's always people around and lots of socialization and very, very a lot of connectedness. And here you can see the therapists who I worked with in the bottom right. So there we are, Rett syndrome with us from Perth in Australia, linking up with this team in China, in Shenzhen, to look to see what can we learn from an environmental enrichment program for young girls with Rett syndrome. So our first question is, can we develop an appropriate environmental enrichment program? So my first slides will talk about that. And one of the key the key features of learning any skills, including gross motor skills, is practice. And when we look at children in the general population, they practice enormously. Learning to walk practice is distributed across the day. Little children spend up to 6 hours a day upright and take lots and lots of steps, and they perform their attempts at walking in lots of different ways, different floor surfaces, different environmental settings, sometimes with people, sometimes without people. There's a lot of variety in that component of practice. So that was important for us to remember when we were designing the program. And when you need to learn motor skills, you need a whole range of aspects. This is motor learning theory. There's a whole host of both internal and external motivators to learning. And we needed to take that into account when we designed the program. So providing choices between activities, being engaging and age appropriate for the activities, and practice is very much related to the learning of the task. But feeling rapport, allowing time in Rett syndrome to overcome dyspraxia, lots of stimulation, praise, rewards, and obviously adequate rest. And that you've got a safe environment that has equipment, toys that the girl is interested in, and often opportunities to do things in different ways. So we had a very proactive environment that we created to draw this notion of practice, as well as all of these concepts in motor learning theory together. So I just want to just spend a couple of minutes thinking about dyspraxia, because this really is a feature that we see to a lesser or greater extent in many, many girls and indeed women with Rett syndrome. And it means it's hard to carry out what you're actually intending to do. And I heard, and again, this was at a Rett syndrome conference, somebody describing really clearly that dyspraxia was like going along back roads and not along the highway. And you get there, but it just takes more time. So I did not invent that phrase, somebody else did, but it really clarifies to me what dyspraxia means in a functional sense. And so waiting for the response is really critical. And so we also would talk the girl through the movement, model the movement, wait for her to be able to respond so that she could do what she wanted to do. And I've just got this is in relation to choice making, which is from our video studies. And you can see that 50% of the girls in this group of 64 took 8 or 9 seconds to make a choice. That 50% line is here, 9 seconds to choose either a piece of food or a book or whatever it was she was wanting to choose. So there's a little bit of time involved. And of course, we all take time to make choices. Sometimes we can take a long time to make a choice, but on average, across a range of scenarios, there were some children who could make a choice in a heartbeat, but others who took much, much longer to make a choice, such as which book or which piece of food, which was usually their favourite food also. So that was very much involved with the choice making. So I've just got a couple of examples, and this first bottom video, in a heartbeat, she's looking at the chocolate biscuits, right? The little packet of biscuits at the bottom of her. We know immediately which one she's chosen. Her mum says, which would you prefer, the biscuits or the yogurt? And she knows that, and she's looked at it, looked away, looked back. It's within seconds. But this little girl is choosing between 3 books, and she's looking at each of them. She's looking at the one she probably wants. She looks at the red one. She looks back at her mum. She looks across again. She's looked at that yellow one again, and then she's making her choice. So that takes her a lot longer. She's got to scan, look at her mum a couple of times. And that process of choosing the book that she would always be choosing is a slower process, and we would need to take account of that when we're working with the girls. So this is her time to choice making, whereas the other little girl was much, much faster. So this is a cartoon of the model we developed. If you look in the center, you can see whatever the ability, we would set goals for that individual child. And the essential components of the program were about gross motor movement, practice and exercise. So we had to look at balance. Remember the slides earlier where sitting and standing were sometimes difficult for some girls. We needed to think of that as a component of the movement. We needed to think of mobility activities because walking and negotiating the environment and being mobile are a fundamental component of gross motor skills, and that was something that we have seen in our video studies that we would like to work on. And also transition movements, getting up from the floor, getting up from a chair. Those you saw on that earlier slide, that was a really challenging skill for many, many girls. And so that also had to be a component of our program. And here we were, repetition, challenge, building up fitness and endurance. And also at the same time, using rest periods and giving time to complete activities to take account of that dyspraxia. And part of my training with the therapists in Shenzhen was being cognizant of that as being a reason why we would not see an immediate response. And then there was the idea of this on the right, these gross motor activities with embedded within a system of practice. But here also is the concept of social stimulation, a lot of sensory stimulation in terms of the room being so colourful, lots of vestibular activities, walking on different surfaces. The girls ate food during their sessions. They would often be tasting bits of food, and that would often be motivating or help them to walk. And that's very much what children in the general population would do when they're little. You on the move, and you might well be snacking through the morning or through the afternoon. And at the same time, there with those activities was a sense of achieving cognitive engagement with their eye contact, choice making, and activities that were fun, and the girls receiving a reward and lots of praise for their achievements. So ignore the times down the left. This is a little bit out of date, but essentially in the mornings it was structured like a kindergarten, little preschool session. We had a welcome song, and then we had periods of time where according to those girls' individual goals, she could focus on balance activities, then a period of time where she would focus on mobility activities, a period of time where she would focus on transition activities, and then at the end of the morning, the girls would come together. The earlier activities are often in pairs or threesomes, so we had a lot of socialization during each of the activities, but then they would come together in a group and do something that was a group activity, and they might all be doing sit to stand, or they might all be doing some sort of kneeling sort of balance thing, you know, something that meant they were working together as a group. And then we would have a goodbye song, and it made my heart very glad to hear this little group of therapists and their mums and the girls enjoying their songs that they embedded the girls' names into. So it was really, really very lovely and very nice for children at that age. It was beautiful. So that's the program that we developed. And then, so that was sort of saying, well, what does this equate? What might this equate to for children? And so now we need to say, well, is that important? Does it influence the learning of gross motor skills? And so what we conducted was what is called a modified randomised step wedge trial. And I'm showing this graph so you can see how the girls participated through the program. The blue at the beginning is when the girls were doing nothing. They were just doing their usual lives and were not engaging in the environmental enrichment program. And what you can see with the little red boundary around the boxes is when we took blood, and we'll come to that in a little bit. But what you notice about that blue section is that it's staggered. Some girls, we randomised girls to each baseline period, and for some it was 1 month, for others it was 2 months, and for others it was 3 months. And then they commenced in a 6-month program. And after, this is actually every 2 months, we assessed again, A4, we assessed again after 6 months, and you can see that was staggered. There was a staggered finish. And again, we took a blood sample, and we took the blood samples because we also wanted to measure BDNF, which is a part of our theorized effect. And it hadn't been done before in young girls with Rett syndrome. It might have been measured in some clinical trials that we believe are happening when you measure intrathecally in the cerebrospinal fluid. But we didn't have any of that data, and we wanted to at least look at what we might see in samples of blood. And there are plenty of studies in the literature for children with other neurodevelopmental disorders where researchers have looked at BDNF in blood. So we thought this is the time for us to look at this in Rett syndrome. So our baseline characteristics, we had 12 girls. I would also like to say that we approached and we recruited through our Rett database, and we invited 13 families to join the study. We only had funding to have 12, to include 12, but 12, that's all we had to ask, to get 12 girls who would come and join the program. And so there really is this extraordinary appetite to know what to do with your little young girl with Rett syndrome. And there was an extraordinary appetite for research and clinical care in China, and that speaks volumes to how our work is not done in supporting Rett syndrome. So we were really gratified that our other investigators and families in a country that's not ours were so willing to join with us in this endeavour. So what you can see here is the numbers for the different mutations that we had. We had a range of the common mutations, which we can't speak to the proportions, but I was very pleased that even in our sample of 12, we had a spread. At recruitment, the average age was 3. And for these girls, their average age at regression had been 1.5 or 18 months. And that is exactly what we would find if we had a study of 900 girls. So again, we had a sense that we were able to reflect what would be observable in the general population. And our gross motor score was 22 out of 45, and our blood BDNF levels on average at baseline were 146 nanograms per mil. And this was the walking at baseline, and two of the girls had epilepsy before they started the study. But for walking, 40% were able to walk, and we could see 4 could walk with some help, and 3 were unable to take any steps at all at baseline. So we'd help, but we just could not achieve assisted walking. So this is just more pictures to show you what it looked like in that beautiful big light room, the group session. The picture at the top in the middle is we had pictures up of different activities, so that for not every activity, but for some activities, the girls could choose which way they would practice their balance activity, for example. And you can see slides. You can also see down the bottom we spent time walking on different surfaces because we wanted challenge to be able to come from every direction, and those little hard bumpy surfaces were a challenge. And I sort of, when looking for how we would think of all sorts of ways to enrich the environment, I was inspired by some literature to do with Parkinson's disease, where individuals, this is of course much older adults, but were able to improve their balance by having different textures, so lumpy, bumpy textures in their shoes. And I don't know quite what that mechanism is, but I decided that walking on a soft mat was not all that walking should be, and we had lumpy, bumpy things. We had another one that had little stones that were sort of not all together, so there was dips and little razors with the stones, and it was also hard, and that was also something that would be a challenge. And then we could walk on all those surfaces, but also have lovely, soft, beautiful surfaces as well that were usually appreciated. So we practice in a social setting. I can show you this little video of two girls doing something quite similar. One girl's quite able to do that, but the two together have there's a lot of eye contact. There's a lot of almost, I'll show you, this is what you do. And they're up there together, and there's connection between those two girls while they're practicing. The one on the left is particularly learning a balance skill there. And the girls did make friends. This is, one of our older girls and one of the little girls, and they're would often come and watch what somebody else was practicing. So that sense of being a part of a community was very strong. Here again, pictures of the girls making choices, but obviously the whole morning or the whole session was not dominated by making choices, but there were choices to be made, and that was an important component of what the girls were learning. So the stability activities, what you can see in these pictures are very much what you would expect to see whenever you're working with your therapist. You would expect balance board activities, different positions, things that roll to challenge balance, and but within a setting where often different balance in often challenging positions could still be associated with something to watch, something to engage with, such as a game on an iPad. So we really stretched ways of playing those sorts of games so that it's not just sitting in a chair to do iPad activities, for example. So here, just some little videos of really challenging the girls, a girl who couldn't stand on her own, but did achieve that in the end, but really working with her, and I'll show you this bottom one, the same little girl. And we try and sort of take boundaries away so the girls can really find their balance. This one, she quite liked that ball. She didn't want to hold it for long, but she quite liked being past it, but her balance is just developing, but she needed that activity to stay there. Transition activities I mentioned earlier, getting up from the floor, getting up from the chair, featured very strongly in the program. And here I can just show you a couple of little little video clips, and getting up again, and he's trying to encourage her. Here you are. This is what you want to get up and do. And there's lots of practice of that. So there's and also sit to stand leads very naturally to practicing standing balance. And this little girl, he started with one hand. She wasn't up for that, but he then held two hands And you can see her standing balance is very, very not yet well established, but keep challenging and keep working with her, and he will take his feet away, and you'll see that she'll show some standing balance. So mobility, again, the obvious activity is walking, but also knee walking were also featured, and that was as you would expect, working on her hip extension and her hip stability at the same time. And I've lost my mouse, here we are. I think we worked hard to fit lots of steps in the course of the activity. And this little one was one who, right at the beginning of the session, was one of those ones who we could not encourage to take steps at all when she was assisted to walk. And you can see that she's still very unstable with her walking, but her stability in being able to align her body in an upright position, and with help holding both hands and take some steps, was really encouraging. And here is a health-giving activity. So coming back to what the learning program found, if we come back to our earlier graph of all the different skills, this had previously led to the development of a gross motor scale for Rett syndrome. And items relate to sitting and to transfers, standing, and different walking skills. And this was our main outcome measure, which we measured at each of those assessment points that you saw on that earlier graph. So this is what happened to the gross motor scores. You can see at the first two assessments, 1 and 2, the scores were very, very similar. They just did not move. They were like a rock. They were very, very consistent. And then after 2 months of training, the scores increased. After a further 2 months of training, the scores increased. And after a further 2 months at assessment 5, we had a further modest increase in scores. So the learning was very clear for me when I look at that graph. And this graph shows you what happened to the BDNF levels. So at assessment 1 and 2, the two baseline periods, you can see that they are broadly very similar also. So after 1, 2, or 3 months, we had very similar BDNF levels. But then at our final assessment, we had a remarkable 2.5-fold increase in BDNF levels in the blood, and this was very exploratory. We didn't know what we would see, but when we plot that assessment 1 and 2, which were before any increased activity, and then look at those levels after 6 months of activity, we do see a very substantial increase. And the increase was slightly higher in girls who were slightly older, which is, I think, of interest and suggests that if you're thinking of early intervention programs, we can still achieve very substantial increases in BDNF with older girls. So these are 4 and 5-year-olds. All the girls were younger than 6. But also another important feature was that we observed the same increase in BDNF levels, whether that child was able to walk at baseline or not walk at baseline. So, for example, that last little girl who I showed you, that video clip where she's walking with her hands held, the one who really could not take any steps at baseline, who was then doing assisted walking later on in the program, she demonstrated a similar magnitude of increase in her BDNF. So BDNF seemed to respond to activity, whether that activity needed help or didn't. And I think that was a really interesting finding that tells us that responsiveness there is the potential for biological responsiveness across the range of abilities that we observe. So our motor skills increased on average by 8 points, and this change was greater than previously identified within subject error. And so we're very confident that those points, those extra points in skills were a response. They were change that we would not expect to see by normal individual variability. And it didn't matter whether the child was walking or not walking at baseline. We still observed some gains in skills. So a fundamental tenet of this is that learning in these girls was really clear. And our BDNF increased was also a finding. And we found that the levels were a little lower than in the general population, but there's only one study that I could find that used exactly the same kit as us. And interestingly, this same kit also in this same study had a small number of girls with Rett syndrome, and we found that our levels were relatively low compared to those same girls. But then we had improvements. And just like we have observed in the animal models and in other disorders. And it really highlights to us that this nurture in our environment is a fundamental truth of us thriving as individuals. But here is evidence in relation to a therapy program for Rett syndrome. So I come back to that parallel gestalt I talked about right at the beginning, where we looked at the regression and the characteristics of regression and all of those supportive criteria. But there are also the parallel abilities of girls with Rett syndrome. There's this extraordinary, strong, beautiful eye gaze, a winning smile, lots of humour, lots of love of social interaction, and building skills in a really well-structured, challenging program is possible. So this is the parallel, that learning of and living really. So this brings me to this concept of quality of life, and this has really been close to my heart for a long, long time. And quality of life is really how satisfied you are with your overall life experiences, be there how your physical health and activities are, your social activities, your emotional well-being and your behaviour. And sometimes with Rett syndrome, we may see poorer physical health. We may see less capacity to get involved in activities and participate in the community. And that may also be associated with less connectedness with peers. But in this, we've also done some interview studies where we've looked at what are the domains of quality of life important for Rett syndrome. And of course, they relate to health and well-being and activities and being immersed in the community. So these are all important. And here you can see two domains. You can see movement and physical activity, where we have a collection of vignettes where parents describe how their daughter improves the joy of being able to balance during an activity, the joy of moving her body and being involved in physical activities. And also here is social connectedness and also the natural environment as well. I take great pleasure in sort of observing the joys of anybody, but including and particularly girls with Rett syndrome, by participating in the natural environment. And here is variety of activities. So you can see within this framework of the aspects of life that are important for good quality, the program captured many of those aspects. And I can really feel that there is the joy of participating in physical activities and also in the natural environment, which really is really the stuff of life. There's stuff there that is very important for feeling satisfied. And I come to this final slide. Some of you might have seen this one before, but the bottom one, I won't show that again, but there you saw the neatness of girls connecting during their learning process. But I'll just show you this one because I'm just overwhelmed with the excitement that this is and the real joy this little girl has in participating out in the natural environment. She's got a wetsuit on, she's floating. She's used to being able to float in her wetsuit. And the other awesome thing, and I was talking with Paige before the presentation, is how awesome that that woman is who's able to heave her back up onto the paddleboard, and they can carry on with their activity. So I would also mention at the institute in Shenzhen, they really were interested in our quality of life work as much as in the learning of skills, and I think that is fundamental. We have a model of learning, we have a model of life quality, a model of abilities that we want to capitalise on. And at the very end of that program, they organised to have a weekend at a beachside camp. And there was, I should have shared some of those pictures actually, but really lovely pictures of the girls standing at the edge of the sea in the not quite heavy surf, but waves lapping up around their feet, and the fun of being active out in the outdoors. So to summarise, we see variability in gross motor skills in Rett syndrome. Walking is sometimes very challenging, and transition movements are often very challenging. And with the principle that neuroplasticity is greatest when younger, and drawing upon studies with animal models, we have established some evidence that an environmental enrichment program can yield gains for young girls with Rett syndrome, and importantly across abilities. And the critical ingredients that we tested, they were practice of stability, transition and mobility activities blended with choice making and social interactions. And as I was illustrating with my quality of life slides, we didn't forget that the abilities and quality of life components of any activities that we participate in, if we're going to learn from them, we want them to strengthen our abilities and build our quality of life. So that was very much a part of the program. And I believe the next challenge is to design activity programs that are locally feasible, but my belief is that the community is extraordinarily creative, and this will be a possibility in that regard. So acknowledgements go to all of the participating families across our Inter-Rett and also our Aussie Rett families as well, because that's how we were able to develop our gross motor scale, and that goes back for participation with Inter-Rett and Aussie Rett families over many, many years now. The very, very fine physiotherapy colleagues in China were wonderful and supportive of the program, and you can see the research team down the bottom, Dr. Chen and Tan in China, and a team of us in Perth as well. And my final slide is a plug for our current Inter-Rett study. And Inter-Rett, many of you will know, it was established in 2002, so it's heading up to 20 years old. It's been around for a long time, and we are conducting a new follow-up study this year. So I just want to alert to you, if you wanted to register with Inter-Rett or not sure whether you participated, you can contact us with that email address. And if you want to take part, if you're a part of Inter-Rett already and you want to take part in our current follow-up study, please email us. And Paige, I wonder if this could be presented somewhere at some point so that families have access to this information. That's me.
Well, thank you, Jenny, so much. That's just incredible. I could just watch the photos and videos all day and night.
They are beautiful.
What a treasure of experience that you were able to have during those months. And I hope you've maintained relationships with families and will continue.
We have, absolutely.
Okay, so we've got quite a few questions in the queue, but we have plenty of time. We really allowed for 90 minutes for our session today, and we're about 1 hour in. So if okay, Jenny, what I'd like to do is read the questions in the queue and allow folks in the audience, I'm sorry, I can't open the audio on our webcast, but you can type in your questions, and maybe as we go through these questions, it will trigger further questions as well.
Sure.
Would that be okay? And I'll leave control of the slides with you, so if you want to go back
Yep,
to
thank
one
you.
of your slides, you can do that.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Sure.
All right. So we had some folks had some audio issues. I'm hoping that that won't be the case with the recording, but the majority were able
But
to
you
hear.
could hear me, Paige?
Yes, and the majority of folks were able to hear just fine. So I assume that the recorded audio will be fine, and those folks will tune back in to re-listen to your presentation.
Yes. All right. All right.
Okay. All right. So the first question was, if you, Jenny, could please expand a bit on modeling movement, and there was modeling movement and modeling communication, particularly with moving. Do you tend to show the girls themselves how to do it, or do you passively make the movement for her? Do you explain that a little bit?
A combination. It's a combination of helping that child through the movement, so that it's a passive sort of, or sorry, a support to that movement. So there is practice. There's sort of getting the notion of what that actually is and learning exactly where their body segments are going to be positioned. But also it's the modelling of the other girls around them, and you could see that video of the two girls doing balance in, I don't know what you call it, half standing, one-legged knee up standing. I don't know a term for that, but there was one girl who was achieving that, and I cannot put my hand on my heart and say that girl was attending to the other girls, the one who had weaker skills in that regard, but she had opportunity to learn from her friend who was doing exactly the same activity. So modelling is more about what the other children are doing around them. If I showed a child how to sit to stand, I don't think she'd take too much notice of me. But I think taking notice of the other peer members of the group and then understanding what that movement is with support adds up to some demonstration of that movement that you would then move towards it needing less assistance.
Okay, thank you. If you have any more questions on
there was another part.
Them in.
Sorry, Paige, there was another part to that question, wasn't there, in relation to communication? And can you just remind me of that?
Sure. It was
might not have answered it.
Yeah, let me scroll up.
If you don't mind.
She said, can you expand on modeling movement and modeling movement via communication versus modeling?
So, yes, yeah, I think I answered. Okay.
Okay, and the next question, we've got a couple of questions in this realm, so we'll take them one at a time, but it's kind of thematic about the age range of the girls you studied here versus your thoughts on how you think this research what the outcomes might be in adults with Rett syndrome in terms of BDNF levels, acquisition of skills, maintenance of skills. So first question is, have you done any research of this type in our adult population?
My answer to that in terms of environmental enrichment is no. I haven't. This has just been done with younger children. I do know from the point of view of individuals who can walk with either assistance or without assistance on their own, that step counts go down quite dramatically in older age, and that the need for structure in support for activity is as important across the age span. And what that does to the maintenance of skills, or what that does to the learning of new skills, I'm less certain. But what that does to quality of life, I am very convinced that that is important. And also maintaining walking with assistance or independence, if that is what that woman or older teenager is able to do, has some benefits for respiratory health. So being upright and moving, I don't know about supported standing, and that would be really interesting to know how that supports respiratory health, but it has health benefits, which is also important. There is some very limited literature of older individuals who have regained sitting to standing, and there's a couple of skills. They are a lot earlier work coming from the Swedish Rett Syndrome Centre, but that really hasn't been examined systematically. I think my feeling would be that I would want programs for older girls to be structured to optimize social participation and activity, and that should have a very strong quality of life framework.
Thank you, Jenny. And I think that this was what your entire study captured, was that application of the enriched environment, the socialization, the look at a quality of life, and how that impacts gross motor skills, because you could measure that.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And there have been lots of papers of people studying that in the lab with mice.
Yes.
This is the first ever truly scientific study where over time you were able to take a group of kids who had not had that environmental enrichment, and then it was introduced and applied.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I know we're all eager for you to do that in adults as well.
Yeah.
But,
yes.
But I think it's really extraordinary to see the scientific outcomes that you were able to track and document. And to me, that's the power of the study and the paper. I wanted to let you know, Jenny, that I posted the PDF of your published paper in the chat box, so everybody can access that.
Yeah. Good. I think
families.
Sorry, no, go on.
Oh no, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say what it does is brings the socialization and the choice making and the other aspects of doing stuff into the realm of therapy, which I think is was made at a truly environmental enrichment program. Yeah.
And it looked like you had parents and family members there as well as clinicians, right? To really enrich the relationship. And
yes, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. Did you have siblings ever come and be part of the treatment?
No. Oh, well, actually, yes. But as you might be aware, until recently there has been a one-child policy in China. So the majority of the girls are an only child. And there was one family who had another younger brother, and he was often there, but not always there. And he quite enjoyed it too, actually. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun place. So we didn't have other siblings over in the main.
Okay, so really that peer-to-peer interaction between the girls is probably something that most of us as parents don't get the opportunity to do in our clinical environment. We're more likely to be able to maybe bring in siblings or just have other children being co-treated. But that co-treating may be an important element where kids are with kids as opposed to just kids with adults all the time.
I believe so.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, another question is one, just to thank you for this great webinar and the exciting results. And she may have missed, but how many hours a week of activity was done with the girls to get to this data and the outcomes?
we worked for a couple of hours each morning, and we worked each day, and they also worked Saturday morning as well. So it was sort of like a 6-day out of 7, on average, 2 hours of activity. So fairly, this is a design that is was implementable in this setting, and we needed to implement it so we could measure. And the next challenge would be to separate out all of that that chunk of activity and sort of embed that over a day, and have sort of gross motor activities sort of over the course of the day in different ways, and observe how they were effective. So that was the time was a part of the factor, and the time was a part of the program, the duration of work, because it takes time to build fitness, to build endurance, and to build skills, because we all take time to build skills. And going back to that, looking at normal development literature where children are learning to walk, they're putting in the time and the distance, and we wanted to see how that might work in terms of activity. The girls built up their fitness with the program. They are capable of being challenged in that way, because it was like a kindergarten setting where there was a lot of fun and socialization and stuff like that. So it was definitely tolerable by the group, and 2 hours in a day is a reasonable period if we're wanting to adapt that sort of activity over a longer time frame of a time window. And we didn't work for, say, 6 hours a day, because we really couldn't do that in any other setting, but we chose this morning time period for a couple of hours because it could be adapted out to other structures, if you like.
Great, thank you. I wanted to ask a question that I had asked you before we got onto the webcast, which is, and I think you mentioned it, but I did want to pull this out because it's the practical reality of our girls. Did you have girls who because of the age group, had onset of seizures during your study, had illnesses, which we know can really impact skill and attendance and follow through?
Absolutely.
Can you comment a little bit on that?
Yes. 2 of the girls had developed had epilepsy were being treated for epilepsy prior to commencing on the program, and at that time we were actually quite surprised. We expected a couple more than that to have epilepsy, because epilepsy is so common. Over that 6-month period, or the 9-month period for one of them, 2 of them did develop seizures over that period, and that was then managed with anti-epilepsy medications, and they carried on with the program. So we did observe that occurring, which we would expect in other populations. So and one of the girls did develop a chest infection over the course of the study, and that took her out of training for a couple of weeks, I think, and then she came back into training. So there were some of those hiccups which many families do experience. So I think the answer there was the program was there, and then they could come back to it as soon as they were able to do so. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's wonderful to point that out, that these were real girls experiencing real Rett syndrome, and nothing was adjusted for. They got sick and some had seizures, and All of life's ups and downs happened, and despite all of that, there was still progress and improvement with this applied approach. Are you still there?
Yes. Sorry.
Okay. Can I also ask if you looked at and worked on nutrition with the families?
Yeah, I think
to
that
make
is
sure that they were getting adequate calories and hydration, and that's also can be such a problem for our girls, and is part of global health.
Yeah,
right? And having the energy.
Yes,
for...
yes. We were worried. I think in the paper we've got BMI for the girls, and we were worried that we would be working the girls so hard that they would lose weight, and that could be a problem for them. So we did measure height and weight at each of the assessment times and calculated BMI. And at the first assessment, after 2 months, there was a slight drop in BMI, and after that they regained. So there was an initial kind of adjusting period, I guess, and then their weight came back to good growth, and many of the girls grew taller, and we could see the difference at the after 6 months. I could see the difference in the girls visually as well as by measurement. So they did not over the course of the study, they were not taking inadequate nutrition. I think I might have mentioned that the mums have so many bags of food in their bags and constantly had something to offer. And so often the girls were snacking during their activities, and they were happy doing it. They're especially balance activities or sit to stand for something to eat or something like that. That was meaningful and important, and just maybe, and actually I didn't plan this in the program, but maybe taste is also a part of enriching your environment. And we can often think of things in our own lives where we so enjoyed a particular taste of something, and that really could be a part of what is special about our environment. So I was quite happy that those mums of their own initiative fed their daughters whenever they wanted, and the therapists would provide them with food as well to support activities. So there was extra nutrition going in at the same time as they were exercising. And I think again that points to the overarching notion that the therapy wasn't partitioned out of sort of functioning in life functioning. It was really a part of that. So I actually believe that to be a strength of the program. I think, as you say, nutrition is extremely important, and so is sleep. We thought that the girls might have better sleep from doing this work, but their sleep scores didn't change, so that was interesting. But I actually do agree that the eating during the program was of value, and I also wonder if I could have embedded a little bit more in that regard, in terms of building the therapy goals in terms of their food as well. And I didn't do that, and I think if I did this again I would. And the other thing I would do is I would embed a more structured communication design within it, so that it was even more broader in its focus, because we can do that. I think you can do all things together, because that's how we do anything. We talk about it and then we do it. And I think we could build, and I think people in their own environments, their own therapists, other than me, will take this to a greater extent than what I did.
Yeah, I think so. But I really appreciate the fact that you built so many domains, because those hadn't been attempted. So in a way, you were testing your domains while doing the research and outcomes. And I really can impress on everybody just how impressive that was to do that. And it is the foundation for future Rett research, to add in other domains like nutrition and sleep and communication. Okay, so we do have another clinician on the phone who has been working with a few girls over the course of many years, though, and she comments that she has seen all of the positive outcomes that you've been talking about throughout in her work with her clients, with her girls with Rett syndrome. And she has a question or a comment that she's always felt that one of the biggest obstacles in making progress is that many professionals are reluctant to challenge the girls to do more. And so it's nice to see that you're not afraid to challenge the girls, meet them where they are and challenge. And she didn't comment on this, but I think that we're all familiar with our girls and how sometimes they have that startle effect or the tremor that can be interpreted as such fear, and we want to back off, when we see that and say, oh, it's okay, you're fine, and not push them through. Can you talk about that a little bit? Did you find that you push the girls through some of that movement, and do you see some steadiness and strength emerge as you work through?
I think you're right. I mean, thank you for those comments, and I think that's really nice because it's from different angles. If we see similar findings from different angles, that makes the findings and your findings in your practice more powerful, because you really have captured a truth, and that's great. I think with regard to being like that startle, that tremor, that backing away from an activity, it's gentle encouragement and to a certain extent not really taking no for an answer. And there's a goal, and that's a meaningful goal, and being gentle with the child, being calming with the child, and try again. If that one doesn't work, you are gentle with the child, talk to the child, have that goal, that target of what you're wanting to do, and try again. And therefore, a part of the getting used to activity and getting used to change is a skill and a part of it. So it wasn't like a pushing through as in a forcing, but it's a repeated effort with multimodal support to prepare a girl. So in the first instance, that might be calming, but then it's stimulation, because then you want to see that activity come into place. And then there's an achievement of a goal. So then there's the reward. And I think this speaks to difficulties with change. We often see difficulties changing from one surface to another when walking. So, for example, a girl will walk along the carpet and then in your house, and then it changes to tiles or something different, and that boundary is a challenge. And even that sort of thing we could address by walking along lots of different surfaces along the length of our lovely huge room. And that was another way to overcome the barriers of change. I think it's a really interesting concept, and we need to be really clear that does not mean that there is a desire not to do stuff.
Yeah, we know there's definitely a spectrum in our kiddos, right? We have some girls who tend to be more anxious and upregulated, and which may be tremor, fearful, anxiety coming into play behaviorally. We also have another practitioner who's on the webcast who has done a lot of intensive gross motor work with the girls in her practice. And she has a question about the issues of fatigue and sleep, which we see sort of at the other end of the spectrum with some of our girls who are just really difficult to arouse and get involved during that clinic time. And she's wondering if you had issues with that with any of the girls in your study or in your other work in Rett syndrome, and some of your strategies to get the down-regulated girls a little bit more up-regulated and alert.
Yeah, the down regulators, I think we sort of talked about that in the last question of sort of calming, goals, repetition. and then if it doesn't work, you start again, and that make that goal really worthwhile. So that gives purpose to the management of that upregulated behaviour, and then putting into practice something that achieves that goal. For the children that are very really sleepy or really low in their mood, or not really wanting to look at stuff and engage with stuff, it's very much I think the social. Well, I don't have a magic bullet here. I think I can think of the example of that little girl who walked with two hands held in that video. She was very wobbly still. She is an example of somebody who really was very floppy, very, very difficult to achieve, to observe, her muscles contracting and really supporting, her body segments really floppy, and not necessarily so interested in being alert and active for a very long period of time. But there's I think that the strategy is persistence. I think she had rest, she had time out, she had time back in the activities, and also she loved the group work where there was the social side of that whole suite of things that stimulate the child. And I guess that's quite key to having other children around, and anything she did, it was celebrated. It was to really provide the stimulation at the beginning, the practice, and then the reward of her food, her game, her praise, and doing what she could do. And she did make gains over time. So I don't know that I can give a magic bullet, but I think the answer is relates to persistence, but bringing in the social support for engagement. And I think other people would have other ideas as well. I think there'll be other people who will know other strategies.
Yeah, well, I personally would have to agree with you. I think that if you supply all of the stimulating things that would engage a child, so we know we're trying to get boredom and disinterest off the table, that there are just some medical issues that are going to have the girls down. They had poor sleep the night before, they had a seizure, or they're constipated, or something. And so just to persist and don't give up, right? That's not an excuse to say she's not worth it.
It doesn't cancel out that girls need to learn.
Yeah. So I think that some therapy units might, and sad to say in the United States anyway, it might be justification to stop therapy and to not continue payment of therapy when progress is not shown. But if the therapist is really documenting some time, periods of being alert versus some maybe plaguing issues with medical issues that maybe, and if possible, altering the time of day. I also heard you say mornings were just when you were able to do your program, and that worked.
It did work for us, but that might not be the same time for everybody.
Right. So different people have different periods of day, times of day when they're more alert. So look for all of those trends and make it unique for the child. Okay, we've got couple more questions. We have a lot of comments, Jenny, which I will export those and get them over to you, because I think it's
thank you.
A lot of interesting support from people and appreciation for all that you've presented. A parent had a question about going back to working with older children. So doing physical therapy and gross motor exercise is much easier working with children. Outside of your research, the research study though, if you're working with someone who's bigger and older, have you had any experience with mechanical interventions, any of the robotics or other devices that can help working with someone who's older? And have you seen any programs like that? And do you have any thoughts or comments?
I don't have any experience with those emerging technologies. I did wonder about, you can get those sort of sitting things that are a little bit like they move mechanically like a horse, and I would have quite liked one of those to go with our program. And I think that sort of technology for balance could be of value, but I don't have experience with that, and so I can't really speak to other technologies. I mean, no.
We're seeing a lot more treadmills and harnesses and things like that in our clinics here.
Yes. Treadmills are used, and I don't have a lot of information on outcomes, but there is some evidence as to improving fitness, and that's a positive outcome. So absolutely, that's a. No, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I think I'm done.
Okay, all right. We have one question that was asked earlier on, and I'm sorry I missed over it, but this goes directly to your research. And question is, did you find that the reaction time to carry out tasks significantly decreased over time?
No, I don't know the answer to that. Again, that's something I'd quite like to, if I had my time again, it's one of the things I'd quite like to be clearer about. So I wish I knew, but I can think of some anecdotally, because I've seen a lot of video from the program and from all of the assessments. I'm not sure that dyspraxia, for example, time to act on something, I'm not sure that it made a big change, because I still saw later videos where there was time needed to put an action into effect. But again, that needs to be measured. Yeah, so that's a really great suggestion.
Okay, well, we are coming up right on 90 minutes. I think that we captured, if not precisely every question, the essence of all of the questions. So while we're doing closing thoughts and remarks, if anyone has anything they want to sneak in, go ahead and send it on over to me in your question box. And like I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we'll tackle them offline with Jenny and get a QA document published. Okay,
yeah, great.
So,
yes.
So here's your chance. Audience, go ahead and submit your final questions, and we'll work offline to get those answered. Jenny, do you have any final thoughts or recommendations, for families who download your article and carry it into their therapy unit or carry it into the school environment? What's your biggest takeaway? What was your biggest takeaway from the study and practical thing that you would want parents to bring to their care teams?
I would be saying, how can my child be optimally active? How can she be optimally active in a setting that is not isolating her? And how can she be optimally able to make choices to support her activity? And I would want that activity to make sure that it thinks about her balance and her mobility and her transitions. I think that final slide that sums up the notion of distributed activity and practice across a range of skills is important. Even if you're taking steps, you need to be balanced to take steps. So they all actually link up together, and transitions are very much a part of any movement. So that would be my final sort of what I would be thinking. I would be asking in general terms, and then you would say to your therapist or the daycare setting or the kindergarten setting, how can we do this?
Great. Thank you. I think those are incredible thoughts and really unfortunately, I can't believe we still have to emphasize that our kids should not be working in an isolated environment. They are too vibrant, they are too social, and benefit from all kinds of stimulation. And that this work doesn't need to just happen in a clinical setting, right? It can happen throughout all aspects of her life. So we want parents to learn as much from your work as the therapists who work with them.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much, Jenny. If you don't mind, I'm going to pull back to our slides. I want to thank you. Whoops, there we go.
There we are.
Thank you for everything. I hope everyone can download and print Jenny Downs' paper. It really is an important paper that brings lab science to real life application, and I think many of us need that to advocate for our kids, for services, for supports, and also our general knowledge of what to do throughout our days with them. So thank you, Jenny. I appreciate all the years of thought and assessment and research and intervention and care, and just your really positive outlook and joy. And really, you just exude a lot of joy when you talk about our girls and your work with them, and I value that.
Thank you
greatly. Yeah, so thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
We'll have you back again in the future, and good luck with your future research. And please, everyone, if you haven't participated in InterRett or haven't logged in quite some time, please do so. That information and data is valuable. As I mentioned at the beginning, at rettsyndrome.org, we are as equally committed to ongoing education and knowledge about how to live with Rett syndrome today in our families as we are to accelerating research. So our next face-to-face event is coming up this weekend in Los Angeles. And next year, we'll be planning a series of one-day education days across the country, and that calendar should be published focusing on siblings, unique concerns, unique opportunities. Director of the Sibling Support Project, Emily Hall, will be joining us to facilitate that panel discussion, but we will also have a panel of siblings sharing their real world stories and real life experiences of having an amazing sister with Rett syndrome. So we hope that you join us next month. And we just want to thank you for your time today, and hope that you will join us again for our future sessions. And please feel free to email me anytime with additional topics that you would like to see in our future webcasts. We will be continuing these through 2019 as well, because our children are worth every effort to overcome their challenges, and we as parents and caregivers are completely committed to our kids, but the things that we can do aren't always readily apparent. So we appreciate all of our expert speakers, especially Jenny Downs, for bringing your knowledge and experiences to us. So that concludes today's webinar, and we will get a QA document developed, and we'll get some of those thoughts exported out to you, Jenny. And so good evening and good night to everybody in the US. And Jenny, we hope you have a beautiful day in Australia.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.